Hey guys, this will be my Venus Demon Hunter guide for Mythic Plus for the start of War Within Season 2. So I've been getting quite a few questions about the build. Is VDH good? So VDH is positioned as one of the best tanks in my opinion going into the season. We got quite a few buffs. I would say it has the best self-sustain, the best survivability, and also, if not the best overall damage, the best damage profile thanks to the current version of Wounded Quarry. One of the best buffs that got is that you can now get all three capstones, Last Resort, Soul Crush, plus, whatever choice node on the bottom right, thanks to Feed the Demon only being a 1-point node. On top of that, Demon Spikes is baseline 8 seconds now, so with extended it's 10. If you don't play it, then it's just like you had extended as was before, it's 8 seconds. Also, Cycle of Binding got changed. It used to be 2 seconds per sigil cast, no matter what sigil you used. Now it's 5 seconds, but it only procs on Sigil Flame, which is definitely a buff because most of the uses are on Sigil Flame. It's like a massive buff. Cycle of Binding. And on top of Feed the Demon only being 1 point, now that 1 point gives you 0.35, before it was 0.25. So lots of buffs across the board. As for what build I suggest, I highly suggest the Eldrachi hero talents. As of this moment, everyone knows I am an Eldrachi enjoyer, even in Season 1 when it's not necessarily the best. But in Season 2, with the way Wounded Quarry is right now, I would say the funnel damage plus self-sustain that you get from Eldrachi is way too good to pass up. Now that said, Eldrachi does take quite a bit more effort to play than Fellscarred. You gotta track a lot of buffs, which you don't have to deal with Fellscarred. So if you just want a low stress Fellscarred build for your weeklies, I have that here. You are definitely going to do less damage than most of the Eldrachi builds presented, but this is a viable build for weeklies on Fellscarred. Very easy to play also. The next build I'll present is an Eldrachi no brand spread. So this is a possible build. By the way, with all the talent changes, there are a lot of builds that are like quote-unquote viable. No one knows what the actual best build will be going into the season. So yeah, this is Eldrachi no brand spread, or at least my take on it. You can play with or without Spirit Bomb with this build. If you drop Spirit Bomb, then you would instead play Soul Barrier or Chains probably. But yeah, no brand spread means you're not playing brand spread or Fiery Demise, but you do have very high uptime. Should have full uptime on Illuminated Sigils, plus permanent spikes with extended spikes, and Feed the Demon. You can literally macro spikes in a Fractor, and you probably won't drop spikes ever. Don't need to think about it at all. The next spell I present is Down in Flames. Down in Flames is on the bottom right, so it gives you double brand instead of double sigil. You are dropping quite a bit of parry, and this build also, in order to play both brand spread and last resort, you have to drop cycle and Dark Lair Boon. So it's going to have quite a bit lower, I would say, DPS. Probably higher DPS than this because you're have brand spread, but lower DPS than if you had played Illuminated Sigils, at least on AoE. Down in Flames is a completely different style of Venus Demon Hunter than most people are used to. I kind of prefer it because it has I feel like you have a lot more control of your cooldowns. But yeah, this is an option, and the last option I'll present is the quote-unquote standard damage build. So you have everything, but you don't have Last Resort. You have Cycle, you have Dark Lair Boon. You can also drop Dark Lair Boon for Feed the Demon in this build if you want to. I would say it's like whatever, either one that you want to play. If you drop Dark Lair for Feed, then you can also drop extended spikes for either Chains or Spirit Bomb with this build. So next topic will be Spirit Bomb. So I've been getting quite a few questions. Why do you play without Spirit Bomb? Isn't Spirit Bomb supposed to be how you play Venus Demon Hunter? So is one main reason I see to play Spirit Bomb as Eldrachi. Obviously, as Fellscarred, you need to proc Demon Surge. But as Eldrachi, the biggest reason to play Spirit Bomb is for uncapped AoE threat. And, uncapped AoE damage. But if you ever have to trade a throughput talent, such as Soul Furnace, or like this talent on the right here, Chains of Anger, for Spirit Bomb, then it becomes not worth it. You're going to lose overall damage if you drop a throughput talent for Spirit Bomb. If you're able to drop, like as I mentioned in this build, if you were playing Feed and then you dropped Extended Spikes and Ascending Flame for Spirit Bomb, you would probably gain a little bit of damage overall in the dungeon, but Spirit Bomb overall is not that great. As Eldrachi, mainly because of Wounded Quarry, Spirit Bomb is fire damage, so it doesn't contribute to Wounded Quarry. So like one of the main strengths of Venus Demon Hunter going to the new season is going to be like your funnel damage. The fact that you have Wounded Quarry, every single Soul Cleave is copying 20% of all the damage that Soul Cleave does onto the main target. On top of that, a lot of people say, but you need Spirit Bomb to consume all your souls and heal. That's actually also inaccurate. The way souls work with Venus Demon Hunter, if you ever consume above 5 souls, then you automatically consume them. Also, you can just walk over them. On top of that, generally, you're not going to be taking enough damage that consuming 2 souls at a time by Soul Cleave Fracture is not going to be enough. If it ever isn't enough, then you do have other options such as Soul Barrier or just saving your Legion Decree for that moment, or etc. A bunch of other options. In my opinion, Spirit Bomb is only necessary if you want to do uncapped AoE damage. And in my opinion, I would only play that if I was having trouble keeping threat, or like I said, if I was playing Feed the Demon and I didn't need extended spikes or chains. Now, for the rest of the talent choices, there's a choice on the left you can make. So most of these are pretty locked in. I mean, sometimes you don't need Imprison, sometimes you don't need Vengeful. Chaos Fragments is pretty mandatory. Honestly, Purge is the only like flex node you kind of have here. I would say every other talent that I'm not taking is pretty much trash, especially that talent is complete garbage. But on the bottom, there's Internal Struggle, Demon Muzzle, and Pitch Black. You can get 2 out of 3. So Pitch Black is Short Darkness, Demon Muzzle is good against magic damage, and Internal Struggle gives you Mastery, which is like pretty good for damage only, I guess. It's a free node for damage. If you don't play it, then you lose damage. So you can take your pick there. I think Short Darkness is and Demon Muzzle is probably good to approach keys with. Then if you realize, oh, I never need to put Darkness in this key, or there's no magic damage, then you can drop one of them for Internal Struggle. Soulmonger versus Focus Cleave is another choice that you're going to be making a lot. In general, Focus Cleave is obviously going to be much better for a single target and priority damage. Soulmonger is a little bit better at keeping you alive, but it is very deceptive because Soulmonger always shows up extremely high on your HPS. But the reason for that is because it acts as a shield, and you only get that shield when you overheal from your souls. Shielding damage with Soulmonger, you're making it so your other healing cannot heal that damage. So Soulmonger always shows up high on HPS, but you know, it's very possible, at least most of the time, that you will be able to survive the key without Soulmonger, and you won't even feel an HPS difference because your Soulmonger is stealing from your other healing. Your other healing will cover what you're losing from Soulmonger most of the time. Now, in extremely high keys where you're actually, you know, in trouble of dying, even if you play your defenses well, Soulmonger can be good because it gives you a nice little buffer, especially in big pulls when you're generating a lot of souls and overhealing a lot, and give you a nice little buffer up to 10% of your max health. So I would say, you know, play around, try playing without Soulmonger. If you find that yourself dying and then Soulmonger and it's a lot better, then you can play it. But most of the time, Focus Cleave will be the better choice, in my opinion. Chains Extended and Soul Furnace. I play Soul Furnace pretty much every key nowadays, but you can drop Soul Furnace for Chains if you have Extended already. If you have Feed the Demon, you probably don't need Extended, even though you can play it. You could drop that for Chains as well, or Spirit Bomb if you really want it. Soul Barrier is also another choice you can play. It was buffed by like 100%, I think, in Season 1. It is actually really good at, you know, making you survive one-shots, and if it's a low enough key, and if you have Soulmonger, you can make your health like not move at all, but it costs quite a bit of damage because in order to get it, you need to drop Burning Blood plus one other point, like the previous choices that I was talking about. So if you want to play it, you can. Personally, I probably will not play it or try to find solutions where I don't need it or where I don't need to play it, because VDH, in my opinion, is tanky enough that you don't really need Soul Barrier. And we've already talked about Spirit Bomb quite a bit. So I've already mentioned the utility. Now we'll go on to stats. So Haste is going to be your best stat going into the new season. Verse and Crit, in my opinion, are pretty close. In Season 4 of Dragonflight, Crit was much better than Verse, and that's because you had a ridiculous amount of parry. Illuminated Sigils was buffed, it was 15%, plus your Demon Spikes was 30% additive base crit, plus you were able to get so much crit, and plus your Night Elf dodge, that you had 80% chance to dodge or parry every hit, which is a ridiculous number. You cannot get nearly close enough, or close to that number anymore. I would say Crit has lost a decent amount of value, whereas Verse, you know, works against non-parryable hits. It contributes to your healing, which is very high already, etc. So, in my opinion, I would just take whichever one seems highest for damage. And if your Verse is a little bit too high, then I won't worry about that too much. Mastery is not very good at all defensively. It's basically useless. But for offensive value, it was recently buffed in Season 1. So you may reach a point where Mastery is a DPS gain in order to play, but it's not good, you know, defensively, so you have to make that trade-off. Personally, I just would stay away from Mastery as much as possible. As far as trinkets go, the best trinket right now for pretty much every tank is Tome of Light's Devotion. It gives you crit and single target in offense mode, and in defense mode it's completely useless, but you basically are able to keep it in offense mode for most of the key. The other trinket I would suggest for damage is Improvised C4 Pacemaker. It comes from the new dungeon. This basically just gives you crit, you know, 30 seconds out of every minute, as long as you're proccing it properly and critting during it. And, you know, it's just a stat stick, basically. That gives you crit, which is good. Alkstone is also viable. Reverb Radio at the moment on PTR is a bit undertuned. It gives you like, I would say 85% of what a normal stat 6 should give you. Plus it's backloaded. But if this gets buffed, then it will be probably your best trinket. So, and I'm expecting it to get buffed because it's in the raid. As far as absorb trinkets go, when you're progging keys as Venus Demon Hunter, absorb trinkets are very useful, especially on pull. Venus Demon Hunter is weak on pull, so I would recommend messing with one of these. Either the Ritual Mud, which is farmable from the new dungeon, or Bomb Suit, which you can get from the raid. If you play Felsguard, Ritual Mud is extremely strong because it procs off Set Fire to the Pain. Bomb Suit, other than that, I would generally prefer Bomb Suit over it. For embellishments, you're going to want Ascendance usually early in the season because crafting a weapon is like a massive power boost. Later in the season, I would say Adrenal Surge class probably going to be better. Once you have full BIS, like you're not worried about crests anymore. You already have 2 mythic weapons. Crests are uncapped. You have your choice of any embellishment in the game. I would say at that point you can go Adrenal Surge class. But early season, I think most people are going to play Ascendance with Writhing Armorband as they did in Season 1. There are a couple special items in the raid, so Capo's Molten Knuckles is one of them. It does really good damage. I would say it's like about, I don't exactly know the percentage of damage it does, but it's worth more than the stats that you're getting. However, or that you would have gotten. However, obviously, since it has no stats, it's not as good defensively as some other weapons. So I would just make that calculation yourself. Circe's Circlet is going to be good at the start of the season. However, it only goes up to 658, so it will get outscaled once you get mythic rings, especially if you do the ring crafting trick. If you don't know what that is, feel free to look that up on the channel. Master Diamond, I would say, is way too high mastery to be used in keys, but remember what I said, mastery can be good for damage. I would not be surprised to see this used in raid for DPS parsing towards the end of the season. All right, so for your cooldown overview, you have meta, which is, every 2 minutes puts you in a meta for 15 seconds. Meta is not nearly as strong as it was in previous seasons since they nerfed the max health you get from 50% to 40%. We also have a Feldev, which puts you in the meta for 6 seconds. Also, Feldev is your best source of snap aggro. So you want to use it pretty early usually, and you want to hit everything if possible. One thing about meta also is that it also gives you a lot of armor. So generally, unless it's on pull, if you're not playing both Feed the Demon and Extended Spikes, then you don't want to overlap it with Demon Spikes because usually you're like not going to die to physical hits in meta anyway. You are playing both Feed the Demon and Extended Spikes, then you can overlap it just for fun. Fiery Brand is another cooldown, but Fiery Brand kind of depends on what talents you're playing, how you use it. So if you're playing Brand Spread, then you can just send it on trash, which is very useful. If you're not playing Brand Spread, then you kind of want to use it only when the specific mob in the trash pool is doing a tank buster on you. Also, if you're playing Down in Flames, then you have a very different rotation with Fiery Brand. You're going to basically try to use it when you don't have meta. If you're playing Fiery Brand, Down in Flames, and you're also playing Felsguard, then you want to use like Fiery Brand and meta at the same time. So it basically really depends what talents you're playing when you actually want to use Fiery Brand. So be aware of that when you're thinking about how you're putting it into your rotation. Demon Spikes is basically just our baseline offensive. Depending on your talents, you can have 100% uptime, but if you don't have 100% uptime, then try not to overlap it with meta so you don't have downtime like later when you're actually vulnerable. A couple other cooldowns to take advantage of are Darkness, which can be used on yourself. It's definitely better to like use Darkness and live than to hold Darkness for your team and die, right? And when used on yourself, it's basically a 30% DR if you're taking melees, since there's so many sources of damage that Darkness is going to average out to just be 30% against all of it. The Hunt is an offensive cooldown. Eldrachi, and for Felsguard you send enough cooldown, but for Eldrachi, when you use it procs Reaver's Glaive. Vigil of Spite, which used to be Elysian Decree, is also offensive cooldown, but it's also a defensive cooldown because it generates 4 souls, which can heal you a lot and give you Painbringer. Kind of can offset the lack of cooldowns sometimes, or it can even help you survive a tank buster. All right, so for our defensive rotation, how you actually play defensively is going to change depending on the talent you play in the bottom right, either Illuminated Sigils or Down in Flames. With Illuminated Sigils, you're basically stating by playing Illuminated Sigils, you're saying I can survive these packs by just having Sigil of Flame and Demon Spikes up, which is true for most of the time. Sometimes you'll run into like a tough tank buster mob that like has casting tank busters way too often and you'll get punished for it. But honestly, for most of the keys in War Within Season 2, Illuminated Sigils is good enough to survive most of the dungeons. So with Illuminated Sigils, your goal is just going to be to overlap everything on pull. Pretty much almost every single Venus Demon Hunter build is going to want to overlap everything on pull because you're more vulnerable on pull. You don't have, usually like your frailty is not up. Chainbringer stacks are low, brand is not spread to everything, etc. So you want to just use like meta or Feldev plus spikes plus fiery brand, honestly, on pull pretty much every time. As Illuminated Sigils, you're basically after that just gonna tank with fiery brand plus spikes plus Sigil Flame, and then once your brand falls off, you're basically on spikes plus Sigil Flame only. If you want, you can meta at that point if the pack is very difficult. If the pack is not difficult, then you would want to hold meta and just sit on spikes plus Sigil Flame on the pack, which is giving you a lot of parry. As Eldrachi especially, you generally have enough self-sustain that you can get away with that, but some packs are kind of harder, which will require your meta or to change builds. If you're playing Down in Flames, then we're playing a completely different mitigation game. So your goal with Down in Flames would be to have very high uptime on either Fiery Brand or Meta. When you have neither of those, you're basically on spikes alone, and compared to an Illuminated Sigils build, you're weaker, right? Because you don't have a 12% parry. So your goal is to have brand or meta every time that you're about to take damage. When you're fighting like easier pulls or pulls that challenge like the rest of your group that aren't really hitting you that hard, that's when you want to be holding your cooldowns, sitting on spikes alone. So your rotation with Down in Flames would look something like this. So you would overlap everything on pull, obviously, Fire Brand, Feldev. And once your brand is falling off, you would go into meta, only like when it's falling off, by the way. In that meta, you'll probably get one Feldev back, so you can Feldev to extend meta. Then after that, you're going to be on brand again, since you have 2 charges of brand, right? You branded once to start, and you brand after your first meta. Once that brand is over, you're going to be mostly out of stuff. If you're playing Dark Glare, you could have a Feldev back here. If you're not, then that's when you would ask for an external or use Darkness. Or if the pack is already dead, which could very easily happen in high keys, or like a less pull, or if the pull is just very easy or something, then you don't need to use external or darkness here. You could just sit on spikes only. And then, you know, once Feldev's back, you have Feldev into brand again. So with Down in Flames, you're basically playing a more like rotationally, defensively. With Illuminated Sigils, you're kind of just have the same thing for every single pull. Unless it's a really hard pull, then you have meta every 2 minutes. And you have brand on pull every time as well, just to help you set up. So we will go over some examples. So we're gonna go over the Down in Flames rotation first. So this is a video where I'm like soloing the first pull of the dungeon. Don't worry too much about the gather, since I'm like omega not concerned with aggro, because obviously it's just me. Also keep in mind that this is a massive pull. Normally you would be lusting this and it would die in like 40 seconds or something, but I'm gonna be tanking this for 2 minutes with Down in Flames. Also, since there's all these detonates going off on pull, I have to meta on pull, which I normally would not do. Normally you would meta after these brands fall off to make time for more cooldowns. Anyway, so we meta on pull with Fire Brand. We just overlap everything to survive the opener. Still have brand up. As the meta is falling off, we still have brand on most of the mobs, but I think we're probably going to rebrand. Yeah, we rebrand because it's falling off on some of the mobs. And we're going to hold Feldev here. Since we have brand up already on all the mobs, there's no reason to overlap cooldowns. We're going to play like and well, conservatively. If you were playing Illuminated Sigils, by the way, you could very easily just send the Feldev there. Once this brand falls, I think this is the 3rd brand, by the way. We're going to be mostly out of things, so we'll have Darkness. This is where you would either use Darkness or call for an external. I believe Bomb Suit may also be pretty close to being back at that point. So as the brand is falling off, we're going to send Darkness, and then when the Darkness falls off, we have Feldev. Once that Feldev falls off, we'll have like Bomb Suit into brand again, and then once that brand falls off, we'll have meta. Keep in mind that this is like a 2-minute rotation, basically, against this pull. And normally this pull would be dead, you know, in 40 seconds, and it would be lusted, so your brands would last longer too. All right, so that is the basics of how to play with Down in Flames. Now we're going to go over an Illuminated Sigils build. So we'll go back to the start of the mother load. Okay, we go in first. Send a Fire Brand here. This is a Sigil of Flame here. Not really that necessary. I could have just used Fellblade Immora. But I use a Sigil of Flame there, and we stun because there's a Throw Wrench. We go to the next pack. So the goal here is to get like around this wall here. That's why I'm moving so fast, and why I also use Feldev really early. Tag that with Fire Brand as well. Once the mobs are kind of grouping up, I start my Eldrachi combo. So I'm going to use Hunt into Reaver's Glaive, Fracture, Soul Cleave. That pretty much gets aggro on the whole pack. Also, now that we're lusted, we're kind of just chilling here with spikes alone plus brand. Once he uses Charge Shield, I noticed that my brand is falling off on the main mob, so this will be meta. The only reason this happened, by the way, I think, is because I used Fire Brand on Gather. If I had instead saved Fire Brand for a little bit later, I would have had like Fire Brand for Charge Shield. I wouldn't have had to meta it, but, you know, that's what meta's for anyway. All right, so that is how to set up with Illuminated Sigils. Obviously, this was a pretty simple example, but yeah, with Illuminated Sigils, it's not too complicated. You just push all of your buttons as soon as they come up, and you should be able to survive as long as your build was correct for the dungeon. Okay, so there are a few more things you can do to min-max your defensives. So there's Demon Muzzle and Fell Flame Fortification, which is when your Sigil of Flame and your Immo Aura are up, take less magic damage. So if there's like a big magic damage hit coming up, make sure that those are up. Also, you may need to min-max Calcified Spikes. So Calcified Spikes is strongest when your spikes falls off. There's a tank buster coming in like 8 to 10 seconds, depending on your talents. You can spikes right before that, and then you'll be at max calcified when the tank buster actually hits you. Hit you for less. You can also min-max your Painbringer stacks by either consuming souls very quickly before a tank buster hits, or just using like Sigil of Spite, which is like 3, or Soul Barrier right before the tank buster hits as well. One thing to note though is that souls heal you based on your damage taken. So if you're not going to get one shot, then oftentimes you'll want to just keep your regular soul consumption cadence up and just doing your normal rotation. That way you like heal back pretty quickly from the tank buster as well. One other thing is if you're in Lust, or if you randomly FPI plus Fiery Brand, then generally you're going to have a really high uptime since your Immolation Aura is ticking faster on your Fiery Brand, which is making it extend longer. Also, you're just generally going to be generating more souls and be at higher frailty stacks and also higher Painbringer stacks. So usually in Lust, you can get away with not using meta. You can, depending on the dungeon or like the pulls you're doing, you can like try to save meta for the next pull basically if you're lusting. Even though I just didn't do that in the most recent video. The pull after is kind of easy, so yeah, I don't put myself for meta there. All right, so a note on how to gather stuff. The one thing to note about Venus Demon Hunter is that a lot of your abilities are bugged and do not generate any aggro if they're the first thing to hit the pack. The primary culprits here are Reaver's Glaive and Throw Glaive actually generate no aggro on the pack when you throw them. And Sigil of Flame also doesn't really generate aggro if it's the first thing to hit the pack with. If the pack is already gathered, however, Sigil of Flame and Spite are your best sources of uncapped aggro. So what does this mean in general? Kind of means that you want to run up to the first pack that you see and just hit it with Immo Aura. And then tag everything else to run towards you with Reaver's Glaive or Throw Glaive or whatever Fire Brand you can also tag with. Get the rest of the mobs to run towards you. While they're running in, you want to use Feldev to get snap aggro on everything. That way you're not relying on like bugged abilities to get aggro or tag things for you. If you like Sigil of Flame a far pack and it starts running at your healer, then obviously you know like you'll be really mad because basically you used a source of your uncapped aggro to pull the pack. And then that pack basically just bugged out and didn't respect it anyway. So the way I operate nowadays, usually, is to try to avoid tagging packs with Sigil of Flame and just tag them with like Reaver's Glaive, which we know doesn't generate threat anyway, but there's like nothing that we can pull them with that generates threat, so I might as well just pull them with Reaver's Glaive. And once they're close, use Feldev or try to hit them with Fury Eldrachi. Or as they're running in, you can usually hit them with a Sigil as well. If you're really having trouble with aggro, you can also use Self-Infernal Strike. That's a lot of aggro too. But generally, as long as things are like close to you and you hit them with your uncapped skills, which are Sigil of Flame, Sigil of Spite, Feldev, and your Fury of the Eldrachi hit, you should have good aggro. All right, so on to the offensive rotation. So for Felsguard, it's relatively simple. You just want to hit the buttons when they light up. So when you use Feldev, your Spirit Bomb and your Soul Cleaver are going to be empowered while you're in that Feldev's meta. You want to get one Spirit Bomb and one Soul Cleave off during every Feldev. When you're in meta, you get more empowered abilities than that. You get Soul Cleave, Spirit Bomb, Sigil of Flame, Feldev, and Immolation Aura. If you're playing Fiery Demise and Felsguard, then you want to make sure all of those abilities are used in your Fiery Demise window. So that's when your Fire Brand is up. They're 30% more fire damage, so you want to make sure you're like pumping all your damage. That outside of that, as Felsguard, you're generally going to be playing for a Frailty Dump / Fury Dump rotation. What that means is that you want to be using your Fury generators off cooldown, so that's Immo Aura, Sigil of Flame, and Fellblade. Those are your really good Fury generators. And you want to be using your Fractures together. So that what that means is you want to spend both Fractures until you're at like 150-ish Fury. You just want to only use Fracture. You want to Soul Cleave all the way down to 0 Frailty. Even if you cap Fracture stacks, you just keep spamming Soul Cleave all the way down to 0 Frailty or 0 Fury, and then you build back up, so you're like building and spending all at once rather than like 1-2. Reason for that, because as you have higher Frailty stacks, your Soul Cleaves are like doing way more damage. And it's way more important to get those like empowered Soul Cleaves off than to just generate more Fury with Fracture. Okay, so for Eldrachi, changes quite a bit. The major cooldown for Eldrachi is Reaver's Glaive. The basic combo is Reaver's Glaive into Fracture into Soul Cleave. On single target, you will Soul Cleave first to get the buff, usually, depending on your soul gen. But the main theme for Eldrachi is that you're trying to keep your Thrill of the Fight buff. So when you proc your combo, like you throw your Glaive, and then you use Fracture, and then you use Soul Cleave, you're getting 2 Thrill of the Fight buffs. One of them lasts 20 seconds, and you're going to have high uptime on anyway, so you don't need to track it. The other one only lasts 10 seconds, and it's giving you 20% increased damage and healings. Main buff for Eldrachi. So your goal when you're playing Eldrachi is to maintain as high uptime as possible on this buff. What does that mean? It does mean you're going to be prioritizing Fracture in your rotation. So you never want to be capped on Fracture stacks. You don't really care too much about capping on Fury. You want to be, like, your first priority is to not cap on Fracture stacks. Your second priority is to not cap on Fury. Do note, however, that in like a short duration, you're going to be doing more damage if you spend on Soul Cleave, obviously, rather than Fracture. The main purpose of using Fracture is to get higher uptime on Reaver's Glaive, or sorry, on Thrill of the Fight, and more uses of Reaver's Glaive throughout the whole dungeon. So in like hole that you're in at the moment, it's better to like just spam Soul Cleaves and also to throw your Reaver's Glaive immediately. If you do that, then you're going to be losing damage in future pulls, because you'll have lower uptime on Thrill of the Fight in general. One other thing also to note is that when you Fracture after you're throwing your Reaver's Glaive, you're going to apply your mark. I don't forget what the mark's actually called, but you're going to apply, I think it's Reaver's Mark probably, to the target that you fractured. You're going to want to be targeting that mob the entire time, and that's because of Wounded Quarry. Every physical damage you do to that Wounded Quarry mob is going to be generating more souls. So you want to be targeting that the whole time. One other thing also, you want to be using Immora off cooldown. With the new changes to Fallout, it's like your best soul generating skill, no matter what the target count is. I guess it technically generates less than Fracture on single target, but you do want to be spamming Immora off cooldown anyway because it extends the duration of your fiery brand. So there's 2 major mistakes with Eldrachi you can make. So number 1 is you don't want to use the hunt when you have Reaver's Glaive available. So whenever you hunt, it just gives you Reaver's Glaive. But if you already have Reaver's Glaive, it's not going to give you 2 charges. You're just going to completely waste your hunt. So you want to be spending, if you have hunt up, then you want to like spend Reaver's Glaive first and then hunt. Even if you're going to like override your Thrill of the Fight early, that doesn't matter. You're still going to want to throw your Reaver's Glaive and just hunt immediately. One thing also that you can do that we didn't mention is if you're fighting up like the end of a pack and you don't really care how much damage and healing you do, like it's just the last mob that you're finishing off, you can intentionally not throw Reaver's Glaive and just build up souls for your Art of the Glaive stacks, and that'll give you more uptime later in the fight, or later in the dungeon rather. If you're not doing that, however, you want to not proc. So these are the 2 exceptions. So the general rule, however, is that you're going to want to not throw Reaver's Glaive if your Thrill of the Fight is, you're going to not want to like reapply Thrill of the Fight until it's actually run out. So if it's like 10, so whenever you proc it, as it's 10 seconds left, that means for the next 10 seconds, you're probably not throwing Reaver's Glaive, or at least not procking like your final combo. You don't override the buff. You want to play for max buff uptime. The exceptions for this, another exception to this is if you're doing like a massive pull, and this is like one of the most important pulls in the dungeon, then like the actual hit when you Soul Cleave and complete your combo is a lot of your uncapped AoE damage. You can just like chain throw Reaver's Glaives back to back to back in like a really big pull, but also just keep in mind that this is going to severely impact the uptime you have on Thrill of the Fight later in the key. You don't want to like bank too many Art of the Glaive stacks, because with the hunt resets we get from the tier set, sometimes you'll get put in a position where you have like Reaver's Glaive available, 20 Art of the Glaive stacks, and hunt available, which means you're like kind of backed up on generating Reaver's Glaives. It's kind of okay sometimes in big pulls to just throw Reaver's Glaive over and over again, but you know, use with moderation, because it is going to impact your uptime later in the key. So for the tier set, we kind of talked about it a bit, but basically whenever it procs, you're getting a meta, you're getting 4 seconds of meta, and very often you are getting a hunt reset. I don't know what the percentage actually is. The main way this changes how you play is playing, especially if you're playing Down in Flames. Oftentimes if you proc that meta, you can kind of hold the cooldown for a little bit longer. And also whenever your hunt resets, you can, if you get a hunt reset, then you're going to want to use the hunt obviously immediately to proc a Reaver's Glaive. So if you have one ready, you just throw it and then immediately hunt. All right, for Demon Hunter utility, so it's not quite as strong as it was in Dragonflight, but we still have some good stuff. So we have Sigil of Silence. Generally, you want to use Silence when kicks are down. So the way it would look is like you'd pull a pack, everyone kicks once, and then you silence. again, basically. It's a really good combo with the Pressing Roar since, you know, increases your sound duration by 50%. Another thing we have is Sigil of Misery. So Sigil of Misery has many uses. So the first use is the most common use, but it's not the most useful use. So it says an AoE stop. If Misery stuff, then obviously it gets feared, so it'll stop casting. Misery's baseline cooldown is 2 minutes. So it's kind of just one-time use per pull. You can use it as a skip, which is very useful. So Demon Hunter, you should probably play Night Elf mainly not only for this reason, but many other reasons, but Night Elf is the best race for Demon Hunter. To use it as a skip, you just Misery the whole pack. This only works, by the way, if the whole pack is vulnerable to CC, but you just Misery the whole pack, and then everyone runs through. Once they're all through, you Shadow Meld. You need to be through too, of course. Then you Shadow Meld, and then the pack just resets. And also you can use it to stall, so if someone like Ninja pulls or something, an extra pack in your group, you can just Misery it. Then your whole group has like 20 seconds to think about how to deal with it. Also, you can Misery ads on a boss if they're spawning like the last set of ads or something, you don't want to deal with it, you can just Misery and then finish the boss. Sigil of Chains is also another thing that we have, so you can use it for grouping. This is a primary use case where there's like a bunch of mobs that will not move, but they're like close enough to be grouped together, so you can chains them depending on what you're fighting. So if there's a boss that's spawning a bunch of ads, you can grip them together sometimes. You can also grip as an AoE stop, so anything that can't cast while moving will like stop casting when you grip it. Sigil of Chains also comes with a slow. It's a very useful kiting tool as well. Also have Chaos Nova, so it's your AoE stun. One thing to note, if you're playing Chaos Fragrance, which I highly recommend, Chaos Nova also gives you a lot of souls. It can proc your Painbringer, gives you a Soulmonger field if you play that as well. Also refunds a bunch of spikes with Darkness was mentioned earlier, so it's like your cooldown, but you can also use it for group checks. We also have Imprison. So Imprison has a few uses. So the first use is as a stop. If you engage something, it'll get incapped, then it'll stop casting. Usually it gets break pretty instantly. You can use Imprison for skips. So Imprison along with Sap are actually the only two PCs that you can use for a skip in this way. If you imprison something and then walk past it, it will not aggro anyone that walks past it. Only Sap and Imprison have this feature. So for instance, Monk Para, Shackle Undead, or a lot of other CCs don't have this. So Imprison is one of the only ones that works for this for certain skips. And you can actually use it the way Blizzard intended as an actual CC. So if you're rolling up to a pack and there's like a bunch of mobs, there's like too many mobs, like too many casters or too many shooters in the pool, then you can like prison one, pull the pack away, and then fight the prison bomb later when it's safer. I think VDH is probably the most mobile of all the classes, and it's definitely the most mobile of all the tanks. Double Infernal Strike, you have Vengeful Retreat, you have double jumps. There's many things you can do. You can do like certain skips, you can like pull from a different location, you can use your mobility to kite. You can just use it to like get ahead of your group so that there's no way they can pull aggro since they're not even there yet. Bunch of things you can do with your mobility that we will not we're not gonna go over like all the uses here. All right, so then we're gonna go over some random tricks and macros. So one thing is moving with glide. So you should bind your glide key to somewhere on your bar that's very easy to access. The reason for this is that you want to be, when you're moving, like just traveling, you want to do jump glide rather than jump double jump glide jump double jump glide. The reason for that is because when you glide, propels your character forward, so you want to be doing more glides like per second, and to do that it's better to just do single jump glide, and to do that you need to bind glide to an actual key. Another thing you can do is cancel Feldev. Other than the first Feldev you do in every pull, which is really useful for aggro, in general Feldev is not super good of a button to be pushing. Like it does pretty good damage, but you're not generating any souls or spending any souls, so it's not that good like defensively to full channel it. In order to actually cancel the Feldev cast, you need to /stop casting. Otherwise, like if you try to move, then your character will, it's like really coded weird. Your character has extremely reduced move speed while casting Feldev, and you can cast Feldev while moving, so you can like cast it midair and stuff. But in order to actually cancel it, I play with this macro. It's just /stop casting /use Feldev. So if I double tap it, then I'll just Feldev and then insta cancel the cast. Another thing we mentioned earlier is aggro bugs. So a lot of Vengeance Demon Hunter's skills are bugged and do not generate aggro when you pull from out of combat. Again, just to play around this, you can get ahead of your group, or you can just tag things from super far and then like walk closer to them and then use Feldev. Basically, just be aware that your sigils and your Reaver's Glaive are not going to be generating threat when they're used from long range. They'll like tag the pack, but if anyone hits them when you're after your Reaver's Glaive, then most likely that person will have aggro. One other thing about your Fellblade. So Fellblade normally will travel you to your target, but if you're in like a certain minimum range, then Fellblade won't travel you. So it's kind of important to know this when you're like trying to dodge stuff. Just be ready to play around with the minimum range on Feldev so you know exactly what you're dealing with. One macro that's important is self Infernal Strike. So it's just slash cast at player Infernal Strike. You should probably have 2 binds, by the way, for Infernal Strike. One is the normal one you can use. You can either do it at cursor or just straight from the spellbook, or you can slash cast at player Infernal Strike. The reason this is useful is that certain knockbacks can happen, and then you can just self Infernal Strike. You can also use this to cancel your movement from the hunt. So I'll go over that now. So after you cast the hunt, you can cast while in the hunt, but you are on global. So like if your hunt is like more than 1 second long, you can hunt into Reaver's Glaive. But there are 2 off global abilities you can also use, which are Infernal Strike and Vengeful Retreat. So you can cancel your hunt movement with those. If you like notice that your hunt is going somewhere really bad, you can cancel that with self Infernal Strike or VR. Or you can do it like, you know, just purposefully to actually tag far mobs. You can just cast hunt and then like cancel it with your jump. Then that pack will like start running towards you. That's a trick for the hunt. So that is going to be my baseline VDH guide for season 2. If VDH does actually end up being meta, then you can expect some more content talking about more specifics about especially like talents or builds for specific dungeons, etc. As the season progresses. But for now, that's going to be it. If there's anything like stupid that I said, feel free to come in on Twitch and tell me. So yeah, that's it. Thank y'all for watching. Peace out.